Yeah, Austin, when you're kind of studying for this race, what do you look at? Because I can't imagine you're looking at the end of last year's race. Because I mean, the situation you were in, I mean, even if it did repeat itself, I don't know that you could do anything different.
Yeah, yes, the completion of this race last year was the only part that I skipped over because, yeah, to your point, it looked like a 6 car ARCA race at the end of the thing because there's only about 6 cars running. So from that standpoint, yeah, not a ton to learn from the finish last year. Obviously, had a really great shot at winning and sweeping both Daytona events last year, but we've had some strong speedway cars. I feel like speedway racing's evolved a lot since last year. But there's been a lot to dive into this week.
And do you have a good feeling of like what you want to do if you're in a position on that final lap, or do you learn throughout the race of what you'll need to do?
I think it all, as always, it depends on who's around you and certainly handling. Are we on a green white checkered? Is it has it been a full fuel stint? Do you have age on your tires? I think all those things are contributing factors because handling does come into play at Daytona. It's just how much is it going to be different than the 500? Felt like the 500 you saw guys struggle more for handling this year than last year for whatever reason. So I think all those factors play into it. But yes, those are definitely things that um, I've studied throughout this week so far.
And just one more, how much help do you expect from Fords other than Penske Fords, considering there are a lot that need to get in?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, at a bare minimum, I think we can all help each other get to the end of the race as far as pit strategy and staying towards the front of the field. Making high percentage moves. I think all those things benefits all of us. Because to your point, there's a lot of Fords that still need to win and get in. So, and only one of us can do that. So, yeah, I think throughout the race we can certainly benefit each other. But at the end, yeah, I think the end of the race is really no different than how it would be in the past. Obviously, I think anyone who's driving a Ford, if they can't win, would like to see either their teammate or a Ford win. But at the same time, I think everyone's going to be doing what's best for themselves at the end, as you expect.
Thanks. Hey, Austin, I wanted to go back to something you had said over the weekend at Watkins Glen about this season for this team. You made a comment about you guys have had to go back to fundamentals sometimes, like let's just finish a race. Have there been any tough conversations about that this year? Just again, trying to put things together. You said you guys needed to get your act together, so to speak. So I'm just curious, when you've basically had to go back to the basics, does that include having to have just some tough conversations of you guys all kind of like, again, just what are we doing here?
Yes and no. I mean, there are certainly points of the year where it's. I think I work with enough talented people that if someone's done something wrong or if I've done something wrong, I think all the individuals on at least on my team, we're pretty quick to stick our hands up and say, hey, look, that was on me today. Like these are the things we could have done to be better, and you close out on it. So I don't think there's many. None of the tough conversations have been tough to have. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Because I think the expectation for myself and my team and my team of our team is high and justifiably so. So from that standpoint, we try and get the best. And sometimes when you're not able to get much of anything out of a race weekend, yeah, like I said before, you got to go back to the basics. I think in the last month we've done a very good job at execution, something that's come at a premium. I would say for the first half of the season for us. So unfortunately, we're getting to that point right before the cutoff of the regular season.
Has this year felt any different? Maybe not more of a rookie season, but has it felt any different in how much learning has gone and development has gone on with this team this year versus last year? Maybe because again, you had the win in the 500, so you guys could focus on, the playoffs. You knew you were going to be in. So if my question makes sense, does this year feel more maybe of a learning and a growth process for this team?
Yeah, it's hard to understand or attribute to what or why. Yeah, I can't just sit here and tell you like one thing, but yes, this year feels different because I've run a lot worse than last year. So it feels a lot different. There's a lot more days that, looking in the mirror and trying to figure out how to change or refine my process to absolutely maximize, every race event. So that's been a constant battle. I'm pretty self-motivated person, internally motivated person. And when things aren't going right, I'm usually the first person I look at. So, and that's what my team expects out of me. And that's, at the same time, how do things that I do affect the people around me? And, all of those things, whether if it's leadership qualities or, trying to just figure out mechanically how to make a car go faster, whether if that's with pieces and parts on the car or, how I'm driving the car. So yeah, there's been a lot of difficult Sunday nights because it's definitely been different not running well.
And one last thing on the playoffs, you had also said at Watkins Glen, this is new territory for you in the sense of if you look at your career, Trucks, Xfinity, and last year in Cup, you've always been a part of the playoffs. So I'm curious, how is the pressure, if that's the right word, this year of competing to make the playoffs different from the years of always being a playoff contender, always, having the expectations of being a championship contender?
It'll be different territory next week if I'm not in the playoffs. So I mean, there are times in my career I've had to fight to get in the playoffs. Absolutely, I think that's the point of the playoff format. So I have been there before. I'm and even trying to make it round around in the playoffs is a similar situation. So my playoff experience probably, I would say, mentally, would help someone in this situation because it is the same, similar when you're in. You have to execute on one day. Even the championship 4 situation. So I think just being able to have experience racing under pressure definitely doesn't hurt. And mix that with speedway racing, and it's gonna be a hell of a weekend.
Thank you.
We'll go to Mitchell next.
Austin, you obviously were able to win at Daytona last season. With how much of a wild card that this race can prove to be, does having that win increase your confidence going into this weekend?
Yes and no. I mean, I've had success on super speedways, and that definitely comes down to decision making and being able to maximize an opportunity. I mean, track position is important with everything that we do. So you have to get there and earn a spot, at the end of the race to be able to make something happen or execute an opportunity. So I'd say that the meat and potatoes of the race is still very important, but from a confidence standpoint, I get confidence in my preparation, and I would say my preparation tells me that things have changed a lot since the first super speedway race we did that I won. So I am very open-minded to how things have kind of evolved with this car throughout the races. The one thing that's probably stayed the same is the tire and the aero package, and that's about it. From a racing standpoint, I think your competitors are a lot closer than what they were to start. So trying to differentiate yourself and make high percentage moves is I think key to being able to find success at the end of the day.
And you mentioned track position. Do you think that we've seen in previous years where people have hung back and tried to avoid the chaos? Do you think it's almost more important now to be towards the front of the field in these races, looking at it?
Yeah, I've never really understood the whole like ride around in the back thing unless you're trying to save fuel or you're so good on points that there's absolutely nothing to gain. But the way I see it, there's so many guys that have so much to gain by getting points this weekend, even guys that are locked into the playoffs that can guarantee themselves 6 or 8 more playoff points versus their competitors. I think everyone has something to race for this weekend. So I see very few, but I've never really quite understood that mentality. So no, you will not see me riding at the back.
Thank you.
We'll go to RJ next.
Hey, Austin. So first, kind of just a general question. I think a few years ago, I remembered asking you a question about when you were in Xfinity about all the talent you were racing against, mostly on like road courses when drivers from other series would come and run. And I remember you answering about how fun it was to race against a lot of different names all across, not just motorsports, but the world. How has it been this year in the Cup Series? We've seen so many people from so many different backgrounds come and race throughout the year. And as we start to close out this year, what can you say about kind of the talent, the big names that you've been able to race against this year? And have there been specific drivers you've been able to kind of like pick their brains on certain racetracks and things like that?
I haven't had much like personal interface with, I assume you're referencing a lot more of the international talent that's come to the series and raced on road courses. I would say probably the coolest experience I've had is to race against Jimmy Johnson. Which I would say a good percentage of the field has raced Jimmy Johnson, but I've never raced Jimmy Johnson. So I thought it was cool, being on track with him and, what his legacy means to the sport. I think, no pun intended, what his legacy means to the sport. I think there's like only two other guys that even statistically match up to him. So to be able to race against him, I think was the coolest part of the year. But it's been interesting to watch, like, whether if it's Shane or Jensen, some of these guys who've had a couple shots at it, what their progression's been like, but also like kind of how they even go about, the day-to-day process of, our race weekends, because our race weekends are super unique to any other form of motorsport with how short of practice sessions we get. But at the same time, we're, a lot of media obligations and sponsor obligations and things of that nature that I would say are you would have a fraction of in most other racing series. So it's been kind of interesting to be a fly on the wall and watch some of that, just on how different it is. But yeah, I would say Jimmy Johnson's at the top of the list for coolest guy I've gotten to race this year.
For sure. And even if you aren't able to find the same success you guys did, last February or 2 Februarys ago when you won the Daytona 500, what would be the biggest goal for you and your team going into that final 10 race stretch of the season?
If I don't make the playoffs, be the best teammate, win a race. Those are my two in order, most important goals.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We'll go to Zach next.
Hey, Austin, I have a question outside of the NASCAR playoffs and Daytona talk. Heading back to last weekend, I want to hear what your thoughts were on having no stage breaks this year at road courses, and if you prefer that over stopping for each stage.
Yeah, I think it's different track to track, because each track has different, I guess, ebbs and flows of, you look at Indy and Coda, and there's a lot of runoff and not too many walls and not too many super challenging corners, or high risk corners. Maybe that's a better way to put it. You're going to have a much lower percentage of having a caution. Like even at Watkins Glen, we didn't have too many cautions, but if you rewatch some of these races, the stage breaks are really some of the only cautions that happen in the race. So I think it really depends on what you're consuming. I would say from a series standpoint, there's something to be learned for, the stage breaks or the race lengths to influence, whether that's different strategy calls throughout the race. And I don't necessarily have any suggestions just sitting here. I can't say I've really been overly critical one way or the other. But I think you can play with the race lengths and add probably more strategy into it than probably say what Watkins Glen had, for example, because Watkins Glen was a really straight up race for the most part, plus or minus 2 laps pitting one side of the window or the other, and we were one of the fortunate ones to catch that caution while we were on pit road. But as far as that goes, I mean, the crazy restarts and stuff like that, I think it all depends on what you want to watch. And I think it's great that we'll have a sample size by the end of the year to look at as a sport and see what was better or what wasn't better. The thing that I do like about the stage cautions being eliminated on road courses is that the best cars get rewarded for running the best, because otherwise if you wanted to win the race, you were never going to get max points, like period. Like you had to pretty much throw away stage points to win a road course race last year, or really since the start of stage racing. So for the most part, so I think that brings in the spirit of rewarding running well, and that's what I've always thought stage points were all about.
And one more, how much more physically demanding does it get not having a planned break or not knowing you have that planned break in that race?
It depends on the racetrack. Like Charlotte Roval, I think that'll be pretty challenging. Indianapolis was fairly challenging because it was pretty warm. And when I say challenging, I mean, it's going to be different for every driver, whether if it's just long runs, having to manage tires, and the cars getting quite a bit looser, because these cars, even though we don't see a lot of fall off, they do change a lot, and they get a lot harder to drive throughout the stint, but it kind of equals out with the fuel burn off with the pace. So you can add that into the equation if your car's not driving well, but like just as many corners as there were like in Indianapolis, like I don't think I ever took my left hand off the steering wheel. I got done with the race and like my arm was like locked in one position. I was like, man, I literally never moved. Like I'm sure all of us can like sit at a table and like try not to move your arm for 3.5 hours, and like doesn't even matter if you're putting in a physical effort, like that's going to be like very tiresome to do that. So it's just something funny I noticed after Indy, but yeah, it's physical, but I kind of like that challenge, to be honest. Like it should be physically challenging to do what we do. Not that it isn't if you had cautions and so on, but yeah, that's close to an endurance race at that point.
Awesome. Thank you, Austin.
Thanks.
Then we'll wrap things up with Dan.
Hey, Austin, I guess I get the last word here with you. I had a writer shoot me a question for you, and it kind of follows on what Kelly was talking about, maybe some of those Sunday nights or some of those tough conversations you were talking about earlier. But, how have you maintained perspective and a positive attitude when you face some of the challenges that you've faced so far this season?
That's a good question. I usually don't let myself go home until I have figured out all my problems. That's usually if I've landed and I still have a problem with what happened throughout the day, I'll either go to Waffle House or park my car on the side of the road and go for a walk. But when I go to bed on Sunday night, I have at least come to peace with everything that's happened in the day, and try and figure out a way to move through it or make progress throughout the week. So I guess that's my very direct answer of how I deal with that. But yeah, it's there's been certain points of time this year that have definitely not been easy for not just me, but all of us. So and then there's some days that it's like, oh my gosh, it's so easy to run well. Like how has this not happened all year? It's honestly easier to run well than it is to run terrible. So trying to diagnose some of that, and we've had races of recent that have gone well, that make you realize you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But look, I've driven enough race cars, I've worked with enough race teams. Obviously the Cup Series level is the highest level. You're going to have you're going to be easily exposed when you're racing at the highest level, whether if that's racing in NASCAR, racing in IndyCar, racing in IMSA, racing in Formula One. If you're racing against the absolute best, each weakness that stacks up, you're going to be exposed a lot quicker when you're racing against people that have their act together. So from that standpoint, when it's bad, it looks really bad and it feels really bad. So it's good motivation to be a perfectionist.